All right, guys, today we're going to review the stopping point document that you guys were supposed to complete for chapters 1 and 2 last week. Only a couple of you have submitted it so far, and the ones that have submitted it, it seems like you struggled a little bit, or maybe you didn't fill it out as completely as Mrs. Oland and I were hoping. So we're just going to go through it today and kind of talk about what we're expecting, give you a couple more examples. So hopefully those of you who haven't submitted yet, you can get started on that. And then for chapters 3 and 4, it'll look a little bit better than what you guys turned in for chapters 1 and 2. Okay, so if you don't know what the stopping point document is, it looks like this. You should have made a copy of it from your agenda. If we go back to the agenda for every day that we have reading, it's linked on here. If you click here, it will force a copy for you for this document. Okay, so if you don't know where to find that, look there. It's also on Canvas for you. But there's 5 different stopping points for each set of chapters that we want you to look for. Again, the first one is a stopping point you think everyone will have. So think about a passage in the book that you think everyone would find shocking or sad or crazy, some information about your characters, a turning point in the story, something that catches your attention so much so that you think everybody else in class will probably also draw their attention to, something that they would also stop at. The next is a stopping point you believe no one else has. So this would be a small detail that for some reason you find important, or it made you stop in the text and think. This could be something that you connect to for some reason. This could be a part that for whatever reason you think was a small detail that others might miss, but we really should stop and pause and talk about it because it's important for some reason, and then you can make that connection for us. The next one is a stopping point that shows characterization. Characterization is character traits of our main characters. So far, we're about halfway through chapter 3, and we have met all of our characters so far in the book. So any character trait, any personality trait that we learn about our characters, you can count as a stopping point for characterization. Number 1 and number 3 could potentially be the same. So for instance, if we're being introduced to a new character, you might put that as number 1. You would want to find a different quote then for characterization down here, but this, you could use a characterization stopping point up here for a trait you'd think everyone would have, and then another trait down here for characterization. Number 4 would be a stopping point that confused you during the reading. So this would be something that you're asking a question about. I still want you to write a response and write some questions or write your thought process. What is confusing to you? This is not some place to just put, I don't know what this means. This is also not the area to write if you don't know what a word means. Okay, if you don't know what a word means, you need to look it up. If you're confused by a passage, you would still want to ask questions about what's happening, maybe what happened right before, why you're confused at this point. The last point you weren't confused, you could add that in there. I know the characters were doing this, but now they transitioned to this, so that's why I'm confused. Something like that. This is not like, I don't know what this word means, so I don't get this passage. And then the last one is a stopping point that shows theme or symbolism. For chapters 1 and 2, this might be a little bit difficult. I'll show you an example below when we start talking about it and how you can do this for chapters 1 and 2, but we don't have any developed themes or symbols yet in chapters 1 and 2. But we can start to think about what might some themes be and what might some symbols be that we don't know yet, but we could make some predictions about. The author keeps bringing these texts up, these topics up, so let's jot them down and kind of watch them in the future chapters and see if they're going to turn into a theme or symbol. All right, so I have an example here for you from page 60. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but this would be a stopping point that I don't think anybody else would have. So I have the direct quote here, and then here I have my explanation. So it says, this stopping point is probably one that no one else has since it's short and not much is happening at this point, but conversation. However, I think it's significant when referring to the goals of each character. Why is it so hard for these men to do something so common today? Why is the goal appealing to them? How come so few men actually achieve it? The goal of something as simple as owning a small plot of land seems to be a common dream. So you can see here, I put why I have the quote. I have multiple questions that in a discussion, I could pose these to my classmates. And then I have kind of a little brief answer to my questions at the end here. So this is multiple sentences explaining this one quote. Okay, we want to get away from the idea of just summarizing the quote for us. Mrs. Oland and I have read this book multiple times. We don't need a summary. We want to know, why did you pick it? Why did you think out of all the quotes in the book, this was an important quote to stop at? That's what these stopping points are. If I said, go to your stopping points document and tell us the 5 places we need to stop in this book and discuss, they should be on this document. Okay? So now down here, we have this color-coded document with the 5 different stopping points to the left. Okay? You can simply copy and paste the passage here and include your in-text citation. And then over here, you want to put your questions and your discussion of the passage. So just like up here, we have the discussion, we have the questions, and then we have the answer to one of our questions. Okay? So a stopping point you think everyone will have from chapters 1 and 2. I'm going to show you a quick example. If we go back to our PDF here, one of the quotes that I want to put on my stopping point document from chapter 1 is the description of Lenny and George. Where is it here? It's right here. Okay. So here, right in the middle of this paragraph, we have the description of George, and then we have the description of Lenny right after that. So I'm going to copy this, and I am going to paste it into my stopping points document. I'm going to have to clean it up a little bit because it doesn't copy nicely from the PDF. We've got all these extra spaces. And then I'll put my quotes. And I'll delete the period because the quotes come first. And then we have our parentheses. We have our author's last name. I took it from page 4. And then we have our period after the parentheses. So there's our in-text citation. Okay? So now over here, I'm going to start talking about why I chose this quote, some questions that I have, and my discussion of the passage. All right, so quick discussion here. This passage is a description of our 2 main characters, Lenny and George. I think everyone would have this quote since it is important to remember who the main characters are and what they look like. Now I have some questions. Using human. Okay. So my question is, I wonder why Steinbeck described George using human characteristics while he describes Lenny using animal characteristics. So if you look here, we have George with small, strong hands, slender arms, and a thin bony nose. This is a description of a man. That would be very common, right? But then when he describes Lenny, he talks about sloping shoulders, dragging his feet, the way a bear drags his paws. So he has that comparison there. And then his arms swinging, or his arms are not swinging to sides, but hung. So almost these animal like characteristics where he's describing George much more human like than he is Lenny. So that's one of my questions. Why does he do this? Okay, so I have two more questions. Why did Steinbeck decide to have two main characters who are complete opposites? And then will the dramatic difference in their appearance become a metaphor later in the text? So kind of maybe foreshadowing some information that's going to come about later on in the text. Okay, so you can see from this passage, I have a couple sentences of description. I have a couple questions here. And then I could also answer one of my questions, right? I wonder why Steinbeck describes George using human characteristics while he describes Lenny using animal characteristics. Maybe Steinbeck wants readers to immediately picture George as the leader and Lenny as the follower. Humans often are smarter than animals, so that could be a message to readers as well. So there's my answer to that question. You don't have to answer all of your questions, but you could provide a sentence or two for maybe the question that if we called on you during class, you would definitely want to bring this question up about the passage, and you would definitely want to share this part of your answer with the class on this question. Okay, so you can see here multi-sentence response to this question. So now if we scroll down, I'm going to skip the others. Hopefully you can apply what we just did up here to those. But I know a lot of you struggled with theme or symbolism. So in here, I want to talk about one thing that I noticed from the first couple pages of the text. Right above this passage that we just talked about, I'm going to pull this quote right here. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. I'm going to include my in-text citation again. It's on page 3 and my period. It's a little bit smaller. Okay. So again, let's start with our explanation. All right, so throughout the first chapter of the text, rabbits are mentioned numerous times. Here, Steinbeck is drawing our attention to the fact that the rabbits are running away as George and Lenny come into the scene. At other points in the first chapter, Lenny talks about how he wants to tend the rabbits on the future farm he will have with George. So that's why I think it could potentially be a theme or a symbol. The author mentions rabbits so many times that I started to take notice. So it might be a symbol or contribute to the theme as we continue reading. So here I'm just mentioning that I don't know yet if this is a symbol. I don't know yet if it's going to contribute to the theme, but the author mentions the word rabbit so many times that I started to notice it, which is why I'm jotting it down here. Okay. So again, you don't have to know it's a symbol. You don't have to know it's a theme, but we're going to start tracking from chapters 1 and 2. I noticed that this happens, or that this is said frequently. So I'm going to jot it down and then hopefully come back to it later in chapters 3 and 4. We could revisit that and say, okay, now rabbits weren't mentioned ever again in chapters 3 and 4. So I must have been wrong. That's not a theme or it's not a symbol. It was just frequent in chapters 1 and 2. Okay. It's something we can keep thinking about as we read chapters 3 and 4 and chapters 5 and 6. So I want you guys to remember that, again, for each set of 2 chapters, you're doing 5. So you have your chapters 3 and 4 that you should start working on now that we're about halfway through chapter 3. And then after that, we'll have chapters 5 and 6 that you're working on. Again, if you have not yet finished chapters 1 and 2 and submitted that, please do that as soon as possible. And then you'll get started on chapters 3 and 4 after that. If you guys are still confused about these middle ones that I didn't give you examples on, please let Mrs. Oland or I know so that we can help you. We can give you more specific examples for each of these. But I just wanted to give you one broad example and then one example of what I saw a lot of students struggling with so that you can get started on that. All right, get started on your stopping points for 3 and 4 if you haven't yet, and let me know if you have questions.